that America will become a land sharing the fruits of the land, not for the favored few, not to satisfy greed, but that all may live in a land in which the Lord has provided an abundance sufficient for the luxury and convenience of the people in general, I think.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is General Smedley Butler. I'm here with Judge James Horton. We're the General, the Judge, and we're Yellowhammers, talking about issues in Alabama and just what we can do to make your life just a little bit better. How you doing, Judge?
I'm doing great, General. How are you?
I'm good. First topic today, April 30th. In the year of our Lord, 2024, the Alabama lottery fails by one vote in the committee. What do you think about the Alabama lottery, Judge?
Well, my own personal experience goes back to, I guess, the Don Siegelman governorship, right? So that was the first time that I can recall there being a major push for the education lottery. It failed. Almost everybody thought it was a great idea. Didn't get out of the legislature. So here we are 24 years later having the exact same conversation. When I have friends who live in Georgia, their kids go to college for free if they maintain even a B average. How much student loan debt do you and I have?
I have a significant amount of student loan debt.
As do I, which we wouldn't have had we been fortunate enough to be born in a state with an education lottery. And the things that we're talking about today, Smedley, that really stand out for me, this is not rocket science. These are common sense things that our legislature knows damn well they should be doing. And they're not, for whatever reason. Of course, we have thoughts on that I'm sure that we're going to get to.
Well, apparently the sticking point last spring was a $5 million dedicated cost of living increase for teacher retirees, which would have amounted to about $50 for a 25-year retiree. And they just didn't think that was right. As well as they were not just going to be an educational supplement. It was going to be infrastructure as well as business development. So there were a lot of fingers in this pot trying to get this money.
Everybody wanted a piece, as usual.
Correct. And they could not come together and agree specifically on how these funds should be spent once they got them. In the meantime, money is flowing over the borders to Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, and Mississippi now has a lottery.
When we think about that, every state bordering Alabama has a lottery. So clearly it's something that's beneficial to these states. Something that we're not talking about New York or California, these bastions of liberalism that everybody talks about. We're talking about other southern states, our next door neighbor, where people from Huntsville, from Tuscaloosa, from even the center part of the state, from Birmingham, are driving to Georgia to get lottery tickets every single time the Powerball gets high so they can pay to send someone else's kids to school. And it's just bizarre.
There's only 5 states that do not have the lottery in America. Alabama's one of them, and Nevada, Alaska, Utah, Hawaii.
We're going to see a trend here where other states have taken common sense steps to help their citizens, and Alabama just hasn't, for whatever reason. And the lottery is Exhibit A for that.
Well, my initial gut instinct was, the Porch Creek Indians were standing in the way of that. And for people that don't know, the Porch Creek Indians are the only federally recognized tribe in the state of Alabama that can have their own sovereignty for stuff like casinos and whatever.
They have that big building in Wetumpka, I think it is, right?
Yes.
On 65,
they've got several,
to the
yes.
beach.
Yes.
Right.
The Wind Creek Casino, but it's technically not a casino. It's a bingo hall. They don't have table games. They don't have sports betting. They called it a Class 2 casino. And they were willing to give up their monopoly in the state of Alabama to have the lottery and like sports betting and Class 3 casinos that have table games like craps, blackjack, poker, all of that.
To that end, let's not pretend like Tunica or Biloxi or any of these places that have legalized gambling in Mississippi are that far. Hell, you can hop a plane and get to Vegas for $200 certain times of the year. So it's not like not having gambling here, not having sports betting, or keeping Alabamians from doing it. People are running underground bookies. People are betting offshore, and the only thing that's happening is they've driven these activities underground, which means the state's not getting its portion. These are still happening, but nobody's benefiting from this underground black market commerce.
Do you know what the number one market is for college football in America? Television market.
I'm gonna guess it's Birmingham.
It's Birmingham by a mile. And I know for a fact, a lot of my friends are gambling on all those football games.
I know for a fact mine are too. And that's not just because we have some of the same friends.
That too. But people are using these offshore bookies, and even so, FanDuel can't even come into Alabama and do any of the rotisserie type of betting that kind of started out.
The daily fantasy sports stuff that was so popular recently.
Right.
And still is everywhere but here.
Correct. We just put up a fence around the state saying not here. And I've got some numbers here for you, Judge.
I'd love to hear them.
So if we implemented the lottery, we would bring in yearly $270 to $386 million. If we implemented casino gambling, the state would bring in $398 to $423 million. Electronic gaming, $233 million to $290 million. Sports betting would be $6 million, which I think is incredibly on the low end.
That seems low.
Yeah, I don't think these people will understand our degenerate nature for sports gambling in this state. But that is a total of between $700 and $800 million yearly for this state.
It's pushing $1 billion, $1 billion with a B.
And that money can be put towards roads, infrastructure, business development, education,
law enforcement, schools, our failing prison system, all of these things that Alabama's deficient in.
We do not have time to talk about the failing prison system today, Judge.
Not with me around.
That is a whole separate topic of conversation that's going to take days to unpack.
But the idea is that's a massive revenue stream for the state that's completely untapped.
Absolutely. And the only reason we can't agree to deal with it is because our legislature cannot get along just one time to figure out how these funds should be spent.
People treat this entire conversation, as they do with most politics, like it's a zero-sum game. If somebody else gets something I don't get, I've lost. And I think that's the biggest problem for us in this country from a political level. If my neighbor's doing well, I'm happy for them. If something happens where even if it doesn't come directly to me, let's say I don't have kids. We pass an education lottery, and the Alabama school systems are rocking. They're fantastic. I'm happy about that because it benefits my state. It benefits those around me. It raises the water level so that everybody goes higher.
Well, look at Georgia. They've been implementing the Hope Scholarship there and bringing on all these athletes that, one, most of their baseball team is on the Hope Scholarship, so they don't even have to share scholarships there. Two, they've got walk-ons on Hope Scholarship for the Georgia football team, which has greatly helped their recruiting. It's directly led to national championships for Georgia, which, as everyone in Alabama knows, brings in massive revenue for your local town and your state. Not just that, but Tennessee's on the up and up. You know, Florida State was on the up and up until they had a disaster year this year.
And it continues past that. So once these kids go to school and they graduate, you have a more educated, diverse workforce that makes it more attractive to employers, these large corporations that are coming in. People don't realize that because there are some notable exceptions like Huntsville, but Alabama is still a very rural agrarian economy for most of it. And that's great. It's one of our natural resources. But we're not benefiting from industrial capacity, from some of these more high-tech jobs and things that are available and that are growing in other parts of the country. Alabama's getting left behind because we don't have the sort of educated workforce that some of these other states do. And the reason is things like this, these obvious opportunities. And it doesn't have to be college. We're in a day and age now when what you and I heard when we were younger is if you want to make something out of yourself, you got to go to college.
Right.
Well, these days we know that's not necessarily true, that trades and various things a lot of times can be a better investment. This can go to pay for that sort of job training, trade schools. It doesn't have to be limited to college. And also, It's for the K-12 situation.
I've been really interested in Germany. They have it's called a two-track system where you can start and be on a college educated track system, or as early as like your sophomore year in high school, start learning a trade. So as soon as you leave high school, you're ready to enter a skilled workforce for automobile manufacturing, air conditioner, repair and maintenance, anything that requires highly technical skills for complex machinery is in high demand right now.
And there are trade schools in Alabama. I went to one in high school where we had HVAC, we had auto body, we had these various trades that you could learn. But that was fairly limited, and I think I'm more the exception than the rule that got to go to something like that. There's also, with the rise of industrial manufacturing, and particularly like these automated manufacturing systems where they have robots building cars, making steel, all of that. There's something called mechatronics that has risen recently.
What is mechatronics?
So I can best explain it with an analogy. I've got a good friend who is a EOD tech in the Army.
Okay.
Think Hurt Locker, right? He hates the movie, but you get the idea.
The guy in the suit that walks up and disarms bombs.
Yeah, walks up, diffuses the bombs. And a lot of what they use to do that are robots. So these robots, you can imagine you're in a tough terrain in Afghanistan, they tend to break down. So they learn to work on these robots, reprogramming themselves. So lo and behold, he gets out of the Army, and what does he learn that he has? A fairly valuable skill to these automotive manufacturers, Mercedes, the steel industries here in Birmingham. And so with no college degree, the man is hired as essentially an electrical engineer or a systems engineer to program these robots. Makes a lot better money than I do and didn't go to college for a day. So those are these sorts of things that these companies that are coming in and building manufacturing in Alabama, that's what they're looking for. And that's the sort of job training that we should be using an education lottery to plan for and develop.
I'd like to see or look at some numbers to find out if Alabama is actually servicing these companies that are coming in, like Mercedes, Hyundai, Airbus, if they ever get everything settled down there in Mobile. If we actually have the workforce that's capable to service those types of high-tech jobs as opposed to bringing people in. I'm not opposed to immigration to the state, but I would love for the Alabamians to fill that educated workforce by in and of ourselves. I just don't have those numbers in front of me, but I don't even know if a study's been done on something like that.
We can dig around and take a look, but regardless, it's almost like a field of dreams situation. If you build the workforce, they will come.
That's true too. Right now, the holdup in the legislature is straight up squabbling over where these funds will go. And no one can break that deadlock. It's the most obvious solution to impact the state immediately. It'll help out these teachers who haven't gotten a raise in forever. And I know inflation is killing them.
I think they actually did get a raise 2 years ago, but we're still amongst the lowest paid teachers in the country. And that's even despite a recent cost of living, because it was cost of living adjustment. You couldn't even really call it a raise, right? Is it a raise when you've not had a raise in decades and what you do get far falls behind what inflation's been over the past 10, 15 years?
That's where my mind was at, is that the teachers I know are still behind the eight ball, struggling to make ends meet with just paying their power bill and their mortgage, dealing with kids. They're one, sick kid away from being bankrupt. They're one car wreck away from being without a car for forever. So they're really struggling being an essential part of our economy and our, community. We rely on teachers for everything, for teaching our kids how to grow up to be good people, good Alabamians. And we're not showing them the respect that they deserve.
If we circle back to something we said earlier and connect the dots, you have to have a college education to be a teacher.
Right.
You come out of, because we don't have the Hope Scholarship or whatever Georgia calls it, you come out of school with a mountain of student loan debt. Even if you just do a 4-year degree, you've got significant debt unless you're fortunate enough to get a full ride of some sort, which is fewer.
Well,
and
even
further.
Universities aren't even giving those out anymore.
Right.
Why should they?
They're fewer and further between because they know people are going to pay it. This predatory student loan industry is available. So you come out of school, you have this debt payment on the student loan that you have to pay. Could you possibly afford to do it on a teacher's salary? And the answer is, unless you're married to a spouse that makes significantly more money than you, the answer is often no. And so people that are called to teach that this is what they've wanted to do are being driven out of the industry. And by not investing in them, teacher is what? No worse than the fifth most important person in your child's life?
You shouldn't have to sleep your way to financial security.
That's a fact. You shouldn't have to rely on your spouse to make a living if you're working 40 hours a week.
It's not, yes, no. If you're working 40 hours a week, no matter who you marry or what you do, you should be able to have a family and support yourself on your own. Just in case you need to get out of a bad relationship. Lord knows I know many people that have stuck with horrible spouses for the financial security. And that's abuse.
And you bring kids into the situation, it's even more pronounced.
Drives them down a dark hole watching parents fight over financials like that and the control one spouse will have over another.
Let me ask you this. Just off the top of your head, can you think of a more important place to invest time and money into a person than someone who spends 40 hours a week with your children and 25 other young Alabamians, depending on the class size?
It's close. Teachers, doctors, anybody that has a direct hands-on, dealing benefit with my children. Very important to me. And I wish we treated these people with the respect and dignity they deserve, as opposed to squabbling around over who gets what piece of the pie in Montgomery.
That's exactly it. When we invest in education, when we invest in teachers, we're investing in the future of Alabama and the next generation, right? The people that are going to pick up the torch after us. Because we're here for a short time, right?
Well, I'd like to just increase the quality of educators. If we start having competitive pay, more people that want to be a teacher can jump into that field, as opposed to looking at that salary and being like, hell no, I'd rather go knock on doors and sell Tupperware because I'll make more money. It's not a competitive field to be part of the most essential fabric of our society.
That's it. We've all had a teacher in our lives that have impacted us so greatly. Don't we want to attract more of those people?
I have a good teacher story. One of my teachers in high school had a theory on North Dakota. The fact that it does not exist.
Please share that.
And that it's a gigantic conspiracy by the people of Dakota to gain 2 Senate seats and 1 representative seat so they could have extra votes.
It could have just been one big Dakota.
It could have been one big Dakota. He goes, have you ever met anybody from North Dakota?
No.
Exactly.
I think theoretically the guy that used to play quarterback for the Eagles is supposed to be from North Dakota, but I've never met him, so I can't independently verify he exists.
Exactly. And if people say they've seen people in North Dakota, that's because people in South Dakota drove up there for the day and came back.
So to bring it full circle, we can't get this obvious common sense step to help Alabamians done because the special interests have their hooks in all the people who have the power to make this happen. And those special interests refuse to concede any ground whatsoever to get it done. Is that a fair summation?
Yes. I do believe that there are some legislature members trying to do the right thing, and they just can't get around everyone trying to cut into this piece of the pie. And we just need people down there in the legislature willing to fall on a sword to get this stuff done, which would make them incredibly popular politicians.
And it's clear, we talk nationally, it's a 2-party system. In Alabama, we're talking about a uniparty system. We have a Republican supermajority here. So when we talk about our elected leaders here, they largely run unopposed. The vast majority of the ballots that go out in the state, your local House member that goes to Montgomery is running uncontested. You don't have a meaningful choice there. So, what's the incentive for these people to do anything different than they've always done, that they've done for the last 24 years, what's given us no movement on this issue?
The only incentive is to pay them to vote the way you want them to through shady campaign contributions.
So, how do we overcome that?
We all need to get together and do a dark money pact, or start a third party and use our political power in between to force votes between the Democrats and the Republicans.
Which is the entire point of this conversation we're having, us sitting in this room, us doing this podcast, is trying to reach Alabamians to say, listen, we've sat around and we've sent these people to Montgomery, waiting on them to save us for decades, and they haven't done it. It's time to save ourselves. And you and I, two guys sitting in this office, we can't do it. We need help. It's all of us pulling the same direction, rowing the same direction.
And just making people's lives just a little bit better, one good policy at a time. Like the freaking lottery.
Like the freaking lottery. And this is both a cry for help and a call to action.
It's so simple. It's so easy. We're losing billions to Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, and Mississippi. And that money could be going to improve our teachers, our universities, our students who want to stay in state with these scholarships. We're losing talented kids to other states that are giving them scholarships, as opposed to us keeping our best and brightest here in the state of Alabama.
We can focus on these wedge issues that national politicians use to divide us, or even our state politicians use to divide us. Or we can focus on these common sense measures that unite us as a people and as a population to make meaningful change in the lives of Alabamians, and that's what we want.
Speaking of meaningful change in Alabama, what do you think about Medicaid expansion?
This has been a pet peeve of mine for a very long time. As somebody with a mother, a wife, a sister who works in the healthcare industry, I'm acutely aware of the state of the healthcare industry, in particular, all these units and hospitals and various things that are being closed that are cutting out rural Alabamians, because UAB is not going to close, right? Who's going to close are these rural hospitals with 25 to 100 beds in these small communities, these bastions of conservative support that keep sending people to Montgomery.
The Thomasville Hospital just closed last month.
I think that's the third this year, isn't it?
It is. But we're at risk of, I think, 15 to 20 others going down as well. Not only that, but they've also reduced inpatient treatment. So if you have to stay there in a hospital bed, not anymore. They're glorified ER centers now that'll treat you, spit you back out, and send you to Birmingham.
So even these rural hospitals that do still exist, right? And I think the number is actually that there's approximately 50 that are at risk of closing, 19 imminently so. So even out of those out there, we're just talking about closures. I don't think that captures what you're talking about, that reduction in services.
Yeah, there's been a massive reduction in services, especially in women's health care and maternity wards. I read an article today where a woman was driving from Selma, Alabama, all the way to Princeton Hospital to have a baby.
And I think that Princeton maternity ward's closing too soon, if I'm not mistaken.
I'd have to double check on that, but I wouldn't be surprised. But in my mind, I'm just thinking about driving my pregnant wife, who's having a baby, up 65, through that hellscape that is Montgomery. Getting to Alabaster, getting caught in that traffic, sitting there, inching by, finally getting through the Alabaster traffic, which, by the way, didn't have any type of construction. There were no wrecks. But for some reason, it comes to a standstill every time you drive north on 65. Now, between the Bermuda Triangle, Atlantis, and the Alabaster traffic jam, I don't know of three greater mysteries on this planet.
It's uncanny every time. Even
there's no construction. There's no wrecks.
Nothing going on. It just chokes off right there.
And we sit there with our thumb up our butt with a screaming pregnant woman trying to get her to the hospital, and we can't even get that little 5-mile radius around Alabaster fixed so that we can get people to the hospital.
We've talked about the negative impact on women, and of course, we're going to spend an entire episode addressing other issues that impact women soon. But when we talk about the availability of medical care, it also applies to children too. I read an article today where there are 67 Alabama counties. In 25 of them, there's not a single pediatrician's office. Not one. Not one pediatrician servicing the entire county.
That's insane.
It's unbelievable.
So if your child has a cold, you got to drive 2 hours, or maybe more, just to have a doctor see him to be like, here's your antibiotic.
Easily. And it's not Jefferson County or Madison County or Baldwin or these population centers that's happening in. It's Blount, it's Coosa, it's these rural counties that are so heavily conservative that are putting this supermajority in Montgomery that has been in place for decades and haven't lifted a finger to address these issues.
Well, the biggest issue I have is that it's free money. The government is going to use this money in this space somewhere, somehow. And they've given Alabama the opportunity to use it to help Alabamians. And the state legislature has said no because a Democrat did it.
Do you want to give the people some background in case they don't know about Medicaid expansion, where it comes from, that sort of thing?
Hit me, Judge.
Okay. So back in 2014, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, also known as Obamacare, I'm
going to interrupt you. People don't know that those are two different. That those are the same thing.
They don't, but hopefully after listening to this podcast, they will. So what it did was it expanded the number of people that were eligible for Medicaid, which is, everyone knows what Medicaid is. You know somebody on Medicaid. So they expand the number of people, but states had to opt into that. And for the first, I think it was 10 years maybe, the first several years of the Affordable Care Act, the federal government paid for 100% of that expansion. That's expired. But as we said here today, the federal government will pay for 90% of the cost of expanding Medicaid in Alabama. 90%. And the estimates that we've read, I think we both looked at the study, say that somewhere between 174,000 and 280,000 Alabamians would gain health insurance based off expanding. And so let me ask you this, Smedley.
That's not just Alabamians getting the health care they need. That's jobs.
That is jobs. That's a trickle down. Each one of those Alabamians goes to a doctor, to a nurse. And where does that money go? It gets spread out further into the economy. It's a trickle down effect that just reverberates.
But we can't have it because a Democrat did it.
Because a Democrat did it.
Money's money. Money's green. It's not blue. It's not red. Money's green.
They are giving us health care at a 90% discount. If, hypothetically speaking, let's think of the CEO of Walmart calls you and they say, General Smedley, we are running a sale down at the Walmart. We're going to give you 90% off any groceries that you do. You just have to pay for 10% of it. What are you going to do?
Buy more groceries.
Buy out the whole damn store. Rent a U-Haul and go get everything you can. That's what anybody would do.
It would increase the types of services and what kind of services you get.
It increases the paying customer base for these sorts of rural hospitals. And it does it at essentially no cost to the state. None. And speaking of cost to the state, you say, well, Judge, what about that 10%? Other states have negotiated so that hospitals have picked up the tab on that 10% cost to add to Medicaid expansion. Let me ask you, why would hospitals agree to pay that 10%?
To get the 90.
To get the 90 back. And these are for-profit businesses. These are obvious decisions.
If there's a plan out there that other states are using that literally has no cost to the taxpayer, I don't understand why we don't look at it or at least bring it up or talk about it in the legislature.
You said it. You said it. Because the other party in Washington came up with it. And if we opt in, we're conceding the fact that someone else did something good for the people. And that can't happen. It doesn't fit with our narrative. This idea that...
Could the Alabama legislature pass a bill and call it Republican care or something like that? It could be the same thing, but I don't care what you call it.
I don't care who gets credit.
Just get it done for the people of Alabama.
Daniel Foundation, Jacksonville State University, we're not some super geniuses here that decided to put together a podcast because we figured it all out. We're not the first people to come up with this idea. We're not the first people to advocate for this and look into it.
Well, it's not dealing with the Medicaid expansion has been so frustrating because no one seems to care in Washington that it's literally going to help out so many Alabamians. But not just that. The Inflation Reduction Act passed by Joe Biden, that capped the cost of insulin at $35. And I looked up the numbers. There are 500,000 people in this state that are diabetic.
500,000.
500,000 people
Out of a state of 4 million people.
are diabetic.
25%. No,
It's because that barbecue's good.
my math is bad. It's an eighth.
We don't do math here.
We don't do math. You're absolutely right. I cleaned it up. That's what matters.
But yeah, 500,000 people in the state have diabetes and they need insulin.
I wonder how many of those people are uninsured and would benefit from Medicaid expansion.
A whole hell of a lot.
So we've talked about how Medicaid expansion would benefit
Well,
Alabama.
I'm going to get dirty here for a second.
Please do.
So before the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a self-imposed cap of $100 for insulin for the government employees. So if you work for the legislature, you had your insulin capped for you and your family at $100. But everyone else in Alabama can go suck an egg.
Right. We talk about, I want to drill down for a second. We've talked about how Medicaid expansion would benefit Alabama. But the question becomes exactly how much would it benefit Alabama? And I alluded to this a minute ago that Daniel Foundation, some of you may be familiar with Daniel Construction, they've created jobs here in Alabama for a long time. The Daniel Foundation, which is attached to that, commissioned a study. They worked with Jacksonville State University School of Business to find out exactly how much money we're being cost by our failure to expand Medicaid. Are you ready for this?
It's got to be a lot.
So they looked over the next 6 years, and this was a 2022 study. So if we'd expanded Medicaid then over the next 6 years, there would be 280,000 Alabamians or so gain insurance. 20,000 new jobs per year would be created. 20,000.
That's ridiculous.
And we're talking about mostly doctors, nurses, technicians. Quality jobs. We're not talking about, in no disrespect to anyone who works in fast food, but we're not talking about an entry-level fry cook here. The total positive economic impact, and like you talked about, these new jobs, these doctors, nurses would spend money in the state. That total economic impact, wait for it, $11.3 billion.
That's a lot of tax revenue. That's a lot of economic growth just in these rural areas that frankly need it the most. The areas that have been devastated by this failed economy.
How many of these rural hospitals that have gone over or gone under would have been saved by Medicaid expansion? And
all of them would have.
All of them. It's unbelievable how we bend over backwards not to do the obvious things that benefit our state. And we mentioned earlier there are only 5 states, or you mentioned specifically, only 5 states that don't have an education lottery.
Right.
There are only 10 states that have not taken the Medicaid expansion.
But
only
I guess
10.
They're all deep red states.
Most of them are in the southern bloc. Yes.
Has Florida taken Medicaid expansion?
No.
Okay. Texas?
Texas hasn't either. Most of the Southeast hasn't. There's a couple of exceptions. But a lot of your red states, Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota, absolutely have. So it's not like it's split along party lines. In particular, the Deep South has refused to do it. The 2 most recent states were Arkansas and North Carolina. And we know Arkansas is as ruby red as they come, and North Carolina is a swing-ish state.
Purplish. Yeah.
Purplish.
Well, Judge, I think we're going to end it there. And like we always say, thank God for Mississippi.
Thank God for Mississippi. Keeps us from being last.
But I'm tired of being 49th.
And so then the question becomes, how do you get involved? Well, the answer is there's more to come, right? This is the early stages of this. This is going to be a grassroots movement, we hope, where it starts not from the top down, but from the bottom up.
We'll keep y'all informed about the next steps and where this thing goes, but we got to start somewhere, and this is it.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.
Take care.